All right, so welcome back to Keepin' the Comics. So Miles Morales right now meets face to face with the Panther goddess boss, and that is honestly just the start of it because another unexpected god shows up, and just when you thought that it couldn't get any worse, it does for Miles. So right now, this is a 3-part series that is coming out of the current Miles Morales Spider-Man ongoing story right now. Now, just to kind of get you caught up here on what's going on with Miles Morales. So Miles currently has the vampiric bloodlust right now because he was bitten by Blade back in the Blood Hunt series, who at the time was being controlled here by Varney, the first vampire. And what's going on right now is that he's trying to cure this vampiric lust, or at least control this vampiric lust that he currently has. So the Black Panther is helping him with this here. He first created a suit for him to help him control his powers, but this is ultimately just a temporary way for them to regulate this. So what the Black Panther is doing right now is that he's taking Miles to Wakanda, but he has to sneak him in. Number one, because Black Panther is currently not the king of Wakanda, and with Miles having the vampiric blood due to Varney, it's not a good look considering that he's also an outsider. So right now here, the first stop that T'Challa makes when they do get into Wakanda is that he goes to his friend here, Niobe. Now, Niobe here has a key that T'Challa wants that's supposed to help them there to be able to get into the realm of Boss, which is where Black Panther wants to bring Miles so that he can be killed. Which, by the way, Boss was the one that also killed Black Panther when he was also bitten by Varney the vampire as well. Now, initially, when he gets over to his friend here in Niobe, T'Challa introduces Miles. But then his friend, Niobe, gets all freaked out. He's like, oh my gosh, a spider. Are you a herald of Anansi? Now, Kwaku Anansi here is also known as the spider god. And according here to Ezekiel Sims, he was known to be the first Spider-Man. So what Anansi did here is that he later struck a bargain with the Sky God, offering his eternal service in return of enlightenment, and then left the mortal world, where his powers were then transmitted into other spiders everywhere across the Great Web. But with Miles being like, listen, I don't think so. And of course, T'Challa then backing him up and saying, no, this dude is from Brooklyn. It reminds him that they're coming to seek the key that Niobe had been gifted here by Black Panther to hold. But the thing is, he can't find the key right now. And he was like, it was just here. I turned my back for a moment and now I can't find it. So then Black Panther here, he turns over to Miles and he says, okay, it's time for you to put those detective skills of yours to use. So he tells Miles, he's like, listen, calm your mind and listen. Ignore the callings of the vampiric voices and focus. So when Miles does that right now, he lets the child know, he's like, listen, I see you and I also see your friend, but I also see somebody else over by the window and they currently have the key. So now this starts to chase because the person who has the key, they start darting off. So Black Panther, he jumps to this dude's window and I'm like, bro, why you gotta mess up this man's whole apartment, his whole house, man? I hope he's gonna fix it later on, right? So Black Panther, he throws a dagger here, tries to hit this person that's running away, but they simply reply back, they're like, too slow, Panther. And then Black Panther gets stuck up here in some hard light snare of some sort, which leaves Miles being the only one that is in pursuit right now that can get to this thief. Now, whoever he's targeting here, like, she is fast. He can't hit her one bit. And she even mocks him too at the same time while he's missing. But then Miles, using one of his tricks that's up his sleeve here, he goes invisible and then kicks her down, stopping her in her tracks. And then he says, he's like, listen, this new vibranium suit, it makes me feel the most normal that I've ever felt since Blade turned me into a vampire. Everything is going great right now. But then he sees blood, and that blood, he says, it unlocks something in him so primal that he feels like it would rip him apart. So of course, naturally, she responds in fear, get away from me. But lucky enough, T'Challa came in, he was like, listen, calm yourself, Spider-Man. Remember, channel your venom energy into the suit to keep the vampiric bloodlust away. And that was enough to be able to bring up Miles Morales back. But then when it's all said and done here, the woman responds back to T'Challa. She says, so it would appear, but perhaps His Lord Highness deems this test pass. So then Miles is like, test? Like, what are you talking about here? And then T'Challa's like, listen, forgive me for the rude, Spider-Man. I needed to make sure that you could remain in control, because where we are really going, you will need to get accustomed to trials. Riddles and doublespeak are the favorite pastime of the gods after all. So T'Challa bids this woman Beza adieu. So while she leaves, she says, "Be careful, little spider. You'll find Wakanda and her gods have a nasty habit of turning predator to prey." Now Miles, just being so naive, he's like, "Wait, hold up, gods? She means like Thor?" And then T'Challa responds back, he's like, "You'll find the god of thunder to be much fonder of us humans." Now, as they're walking here and they're getting closer to the gate there of this realm of Bast, T'Challa can tell that Miles is holding on to something. And he's like, "Listen, if something weighs heavy on your mind, I would be welcome to hear what you have to say." So then Miles goes on and says, "Listen, I've been angry, or I am angry, and I'm also scared. I feel so violated by Blade, or Varney rather. One moment of letting my guard down was all it took. 1 second, one bite, and he took something from me I didn't even know I had. I feel so powerless." And he goes on to mention, he's like, "What if I had bitten my girlfriend, my parents, my baby sister, you, or some poor person on the street?" But then T'Challa responds back, he's like, "Listen, fear is not something to be ashamed of, my friend, or anger. It is natural. It allows us to survive. However, living in the past and in what ifs is the quickest way a fool will find themselves in a prison. And how also regrets are for those too afraid to live in the present. It's something the dead tell me all too often, and as their king," because remember now, Bast did make T'Challa the king of the undead, he mentions how he can do nothing but listen. But then in that moment, they come up close to a panther. And Miles asks a question, he's like, "Should we just be waiting for that thing to eat us or what?" But then T'Challa replies back, he's like, "We do nothing but wait for Bast's judgment." And he continues as Miles stares face to face here with this panther, and he says, "This is a contest that cannot be won with martial prowess or fanciful japes. It is a reading of spirit and soul. Bast will seek her judgment and decide if the plague that lies within you is worthy of her great remedy." And it's in this moment where Miles is thinking, it's impossible to describe the brilliance of it, the terror. Every decision I've ever made flashes before my eyes. Every mistake, every curse, every failure, amplified and re-examined in a fraction of a second. It's humbling, but I'm not frightened. It's judgment without bias, without hatred or scorn. It feels familiar, like I'm talking with my folks. So many emotions and feelings are packed into such a small moment of time. Just as quickly and intensely as it began, it's over. And of course, Miles still being a kid, he's like, "Holy crap, I just got read by a divine panther." And then T'Challa lets Miles know, he's like, "And it seems that Bast sees you fit to at least enter her domain." And while Miles looks for clarification as to whether or not he passes the test, T'Challa says, "Listen, I dare not speak to the whims of Bast, but I'd assume the answer is yes." And T'Challa lets him know that as they come up to this tree, that this is a sacred place known to few, a neutral nexus within Bast's domain where the gods and man can meet, and if deemed pure enough, commune. And he mentions, "Behold, the Bashia Rui, the soul tree. It's beautiful." So Miles asks for clarification. He's like, can it cure my vampirism?" And T'Challa mentions, he's like, "I'm afraid it's not that simple. It is my duty as protector of Wakanda to make you whole again, but the ritual requires more." So Miles being curious, he's like, "What?" But then the voice says, "I'm afraid, T'Challa, can I give you what you seek?" And that is when we see Shuri, the little sister, mentioning, luckily for you, his sister is more capable of aiding the needy. And T'Challa lets Shuri know that yes, that Miles too suffers from the vampiric stain of Varney, same as he did. So then Shuri mentions, she's like, "So you sneaking past our borders in the hope that Bast's anger will be enough to scare the sickness from him?" But T'Challa mentions, he's like, "Listen, my hope is based in reality, sister. The sickness is spiritual in nature, and I hope to find the antidote within the realm of the gods." And of course, as usual, Shuri is like, "It looks like your hope is based on foolishness." And how Bast will not take lightly to the fact that he brought in an outsider into her domain. Now, T'Challa does mention how he's prepared for whatever wrath that Bast might give him, but he's hoping that his status as champion will at least attract some mercy. But Miles is just like, okay, so you guys are acting as if though Bast is gonna feel some type of way, but the way that T'Challa breaks it down is this. He's like, listen, my sister and I, we may commune with Bast freely, but as an outsider, you must pay a toll. And then Shuri clarifies, she's like, it means that you have to pass a trial. Now, Miles is like, listen, I was really hoping that the head trip with that Panther was all it took. But then Shuri's like, if communing with the gods were that easy, then anyone would do it. But T'Challa clarifies, he's like, listen, what you just experienced was basically a background check. In other words, you've been handed an invitation to the gathering, but it's now up to the gods to determine what awaits you on the inside. And in that moment, that is when T'Challa brings up the key that they had just retrieved. But then Shuri enlightens them a little bit. She says, a key? Ah, your first mistake was trusting your eyes, little spider. She says, if I can give one bit of advice, when it comes to mingling with the gods, relying only on what you see is the last thing that you want to do. And then T'Challa clarifies what she's saying. She says the key is in fact a container for an item sacred to our people, something not often shared with outsiders. Shuri says, in other words, is that my brother is saying that we have to really like you in order for us to do this. Do you accept? And Miles says, I do. And she pulls out the heart-shaped herb. And she said, that's good to hear. This will guide you, but be warned, Spider-Man, how there's no turning back now. And it's in this moment here where Shuri starts to perform the ritual, which is something that she's trying to do, by the way, from memory. While Miles is trying to figure out, he's like, okay, well, what's this gonna be like? And T'Challa's trying to let him know, like, it's really different for everyone. All we can do is offer the heart-shaped herb and then hope for Bast's guidance and blessing. And he tells Miles that it's now time for you to focus, Spider-Man. A calm heart and mind will see you through. Are you ready? He says, I am. And then they say, then we shall begin. So Shuri says something in what I can only assume is Wakandan. And she says, let Bast's guidance be yours. And in that moment, Miles starts to cough a little bit. And he continues to cough. And he mentions how he doesn't feel any different and how he doesn't think that it worked. But then in that moment, his eyes open up, and then we hear the voice of Bast, which says, are you so arrogant that you would rap open a door and not know it belongs to Bast? And I'm not gonna lie to you, if I were Miles right now, opening my eyes and then seeing Bast in her boss nest and me feeling so tiny, I would have freaked the F out. Which clearly he also does as well. And then T'Challa says, he's like, listen, the child, he means no disrespect, boss. The splendor of this realm can be a little overwhelming for the uninitiated. So Boss is like, okay, so it's you who would dare bring an outsider to my domain. But of course, T'Challa tries to explain, it's like, I mean no offense by our presence here. But Boss is pissed. He's like, and yet offense is given. But T'Challa's like, listen, forgive me, Boss. It is not my intention to insult, merely just to help the boy. Now, Miles tries to stick up for himself. He's like, listen, T'Challa's telling the truth here. He's only trying to help. And of course, T'Challa tries to plead with her, like, listen, the way that you cured me, I'm hoping that you can cure him as well. But then Boss, still being pissed off, says, you insult me by bringing another to my realm, one that is spoken for, a herald of one of my most loathsome siblings at my feet. But then Miles is confused. He's like, I don't understand. I'm not anyone's herald. And then we hear this voice that says, forgive them, sweet sister. How was the Black Panther to know? And in that moment, that is when the voice says that the boy was already spoken for by the great Kweku Anansi. And that is when he shows up and puts his hand on Miles's shoulder, who, by the way, creeps him out again. Listen, Miles is not having a very good experience here. And him and Boss have a little bit of a back and forth there. He's like, listen, you look well, sister, Boss. Your servants treat you well. Boss is like, your false praise will buy you no good. Will here, trickster. But he's like, listen, I prefer the word storyteller. Now, T'Challa's upset because he's like, why didn't you tell me that you were already claimed by another god? But then Spider-Man's like, dude, like, I didn't even know that I was. And then Miles asks him, he's like, how did you even know that I was here? And then Kweku mentions, it's like, listen, I am the great spider, weaver of stories, of legend and myth and song. Mine is a host that expands worlds and realities and universes, a reverberation of a string plucked on my web, no matter how distant, always finds its way back to me. Do you understand, my champion, my Spider-Man? But of course, Miles is like, dude, of course I know. Meanwhile, T'Challa's still trying to apologize here to Boss, and Boss is just not having it. He's like, listen, it's never your intention, but yet you always do it. She's still pissed off about Varney. You can tell, right? By him getting bit by Varney in the first place the last time, she's still pissed off by that. And she's like, listen, you will pay for your transgressions later. And then she continues on. She's like, in your misguided attempt to do good, you have now brought the great spider to my door, a slight that can now only be settled between gods. But then Kwaku steps in. He's like, that much is true, sweet sister, but still, an old evil has touched my herald. And that's when we see Varney in the background, or a picture of Varney here in the background. An evil even you had to seek aid to cure. Talking about how Boss had to seek out a new kid for help to get T'Challa to find that kingdom in the first place, for him to eventually become healed. This was all in the Blood Hunt series. But then Kwaku continues, he's like, even here within your great realm, clothed in your champion's trinkets, Varney's influence grows. I fear if we delay this matter any further, then one of Anansi's scions will be lost to this sickness. And he continues to later on say, he's like, it is within our power to cure him of this vampirism. But in order to do so, he must pass a trial. So then he turns back to Miles and he's like, what do you say, child? So Miles is like, okay, I'm ready, I think. Which then Boss says, you are a brave child. I pray this trait aids you in the trial to come. Now, Miles, being curious, he's like, what exactly is this trial gonna look like? And that's when Kwaku starts to like intertwine these webs, and he says, it will be simple. In order to cure you, all that I ask is that you provide me with a good story, a song that one could sing until the end of time, a story to end all stories. But you can tell that like Miles still doesn't get it, because he's like, listen, how am I supposed to do that? I'm not exactly known for my vocal range, while also at the same time worrying that this might hurt too much. But then Kwaku mentions, he's like, oh, sweet spider, I would never hurt one of my heralds. And as he continues to intertwine these webs, or interweave these webs here, he begins to wrap up T'Challa in these webs as well. And this is when Boss says, the trial of the Panther and Spider must now commence, my champion. And as Miles asks the question, what are you doing? Kwaku just simply says, the beginning of our story. And I've always found it best to start a tale. And in the next moment, Kwaku says, with a little bit of conflict, as we now see the Black Panther, T'Challa, who seems like he's being possessed to a certain extent, in that war stance, heading straight towards Miles Morales. Because what happens next here is that Miles has to go 1v1 versus T'Challa. So listen, I cannot wait to see what this 1v1 matchup will be. I think this is number one, T'Challa is a great fighter, right? But at the same time, Miles can also hold his own. But as we can probably tell, this is more a battle of, can Miles show that he has control over his vampirism, or will he give into it? So that's what we're gonna have to see here as this culminates in the next issue. Let me know how you feel about this particular one here. I thought it was fun. Leave it down below in the comments as to what you think will happen next year. Leave a like on this video for the YouTube algorithm. Subscribe if you're new to the channel. And until next time, thank you so much for kicking it with Keepin' the Comic. Bye.